usted la que te mandé, de how hard it is to explain things. Dave Allen talking about time.
Oh, I haven't. I saw it, but I haven't looked at it. I haven't watched it. Hello, everyone. We're here again. Today is another lecture, another day, and I'm going to do a brief, hopefully brief. Sometimes I don't get to do it so briefly. My son criticizes me quite a bit about that, and sometimes you got to go into detail. But I'm going to try to do a brief recap. Okay, recap of what we did these last few days and where we stand, and what we're going to be discussing today, what we've been discussing lately. And the main point that I want to make is that mathematical physics is irrational. Okay, now until you define some of these terms and search for criteria, that's a cheap shot. You say, oh, you say that because you don't like it, or because you don't like math, or you don't know math. Okay, so people go into all those different paths to try to criticize what you're doing. Fine. So then let's define what we mean by irrational. Why I am accusing mathematical physics, both quantum mechanics and general relativity, you can include string theory in there as well, why they're irrational. Okay? And the main point there, and here I'll put the criteria up so that we have something intelligent to talk about. Here's the criteria. The first one, converting concepts into physical objects. You say the word particle, and you say, well, are you referring to a corpuscle, which is what normal people think of when you say particle. And they say, well, no, not really. What we're referring to is to a wave function, or to a probability wave, or a field that extends all the way to the edge of the universe. And so those are concepts. And what these people are doing, converting them into physical objects, and then they start moving them around. They say, oh, I transferred energy. How can you transfer energy if energy is a concept? How can you move a mass if mass is a concept? How can you dilate time if time is not a physical object, it's a concept? And so on down the line. And people say, well, you're nitpicking on the semantics. You're just doing semantics. Well, maybe it's the other way around. Maybe the people who are doing semantics are the people who are saying that they're transferring energy. What did they really mean? What did they transfer? I mean, if we're going to talk physics, we can't be moving concepts around. That's the first criterion. The second criterion, let me put it back up again here. Second criterion is that you use undefined words, or you use them inconsistently throughout your dissertation. You say that space-time is an object, and you say, okay, so what do you mean by object? What is an object? And the person says, well, an object is that which you can see or touch. Well, can you see or touch space-time? And that's where it breaks down. And so they do have to define these key terms, otherwise they're going to use them inconsistently. And then you have the fact that the theory has to follow from the assumptions. If you present a knife, you can't talk and say that the crime was committed by poison, and so on down the line. And I've added one lately that says that when you describe and you claim to have explained something, and that last criteria, describing and claim to have explained, that's pertinent when you deal with magnets. You'll find all kinds of people, especially in YouTube, saying how a magnet works, insinuating that they're going to give you the mechanism, the cause of how a magnet, or how Mother Nature does her invisible work. And that's not what they do. They describe. They say, look, positive attracts negative. That's one answer that you'll see. Another answer is that, the most popular lately, is that the electrons, in the atoms of each of the magnets, the electrons are spinning in the same direction. And you say, okay, so the electrons of this atom here is spinning clockwise, viewed from the top, and this one is also spinning clockwise. How does that produce attraction between the magnets? And what it is a description turned into an explanation. They're saying, look, every time we measure, or we detect, or we use our whatever, our invisible eyes, or the ability to see invisibly or invisible things, we notice that, that every time there's attraction, the electrons, spin clockwise in this atom and in this atom. Well, that's a description. You still haven't explained how that the fact that they both spin in the same direction produces attraction. In fact, you can't explain with particles, with discrete particles, any kind of attraction. And that's really one of the biggest problems that mathematical physics has. You cannot produce the force of pull using particles. And that's why they invented the concept field. That's why they talk about a probability wave that extends infinitely. And so that's when they try to kind of say, well, we covered the entire universe, and from there we can more or less tell you how a magnet attracts another, or how a gluon compels two quarks to come together, etc., etc., etc. So these are descriptions turned into explanations. That's all they are. And that's not a real mechanism. And so the issue now comes, are these irrational criteria, or the criteria we use to define irrationality, are these objective or are they subjective? Someone may say, well, you created these criteria to defend your religion, to push your agenda. Fine. And here they are again. And let's just look at one of them, the first one. And we're saying, okay, what's wrong with claiming that a theory is irrational if it converts abstract concepts into physical objects? If you convert love into a physical thing and say, well, love moves mountains, is that a valid physical theory? Can we say that? Can we say that love moves mountains? People will all understand that that's a metaphor, that that's a figure of speech. That's good for poetry. You can say, oh, love moves mountains, beautiful, love it. Can we use that literally in physics? And the answer is definitely no. So this is a valid criteria to define what is an irrational theory. And so now the skeptic, or the devil's advocate, or the religious opponent, as I call them, they have the option. They say, okay, let me challenge that. Fine, come, bring it on. What do you have? And what are they going to bring up against using a concept as an object? They can't. And why would they reject it? What's their argument? What's their justification for rejecting this criterion? And if they can't reject it, I don't care if they include something else. They might say, look, I think we should also include such and such thing. That's fine, let's discuss that. But I don't see any reason why they can reject this one. And the only reason to reject this one is, well, I don't like it, I don't believe in it, and it destroys my religion. That's the only reason, ultimately. And so, yes, I had to create this criteria to find out what is rational. And the reason for that, the reason behind that, is that we need to establish, if science is rational explanation, we do need to define not only what an explanation is, but what is rational.
One thing about that is, the interesting thing is you kind of don't have to define rational or irrational in that sense, because regardless of the word you use to bunch up these four conditions,
okay,
it has these four conditions. Regardless, if you don't have to use the word irrational, you can use the word dog.
Okay.
I'm gonna call the word dog.
Science is dog.
Anything that has these four conditions is dog. You could use anything.
Okay. Fine.
I'm saying the word is irrational. Is irrelevant. The word is that you use that basically says it has these four conditions is irrelevant. You can use any words. So irrational might just confuse the issue, because then they go, oh, because you're just redefining irrational. So in a sense, it's a bit maybe misleading in that sense, or confusing, not misleading. It's confusing because
why?
Just the way people normally think.
Well, that's what we're trying to change. But we're trying to change that.
But I'm saying, in a way, I mean, I get that that's what we're trying to change. So I'm not saying it's dumb by any means, but or in vain or anything. That's besides the point. I'm just saying that regardless of what word you use as the qualifier for these four conditions, I'm gonna have these four conditions. I'm gonna bunch them up into a word just for shorthand, essentially.
Okay, A.
Yeah, we can
We'll
say
call
A.
him A.
We'll call him A. You could say science or their theory is A.
Yeah,
For
but
sure,
can you
it
say
follows
explanations which are A or A
Yeah.
explanations?
I'm saying I'm saying it's essentially shorthand.
Yeah.
You're essentially saying your theory has these four conditions.
Uh-huh.
That's all you're really saying. I'm defining. You can use any word. It's not that you're redefining. I mean, yeah, that's why I kind of the word irrational or rational just kind of confuses the issue because
it
people have their
offends?
because people have their preconceived notions,
And that's
of
what we're
the
trying
word
to change.
But it's as if you use these four conditions for the word God, and then you start using God. It's like, yeah, okay, you can use any word, but it's like the word you choose does confuse the issue if you choose a specific word.
Well, again, I think the only reason someone would object to the word rational or irrational is that they feel that you're offending them.
Yeah.
Because what's happening here is, and my son pointed that out, a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, where he says, you shouldn't use the word irrational against people. And he's totally right there. We're saying that the theory is irrational. We're putting criteria for the theory. But what do people understand? They say, oh, what you're saying is that I'm irrational. And yeah, it's this second step, this projection, this inference, where you're saying, look, your theory is irrational. And the guy might say, well, that's not my theory. I just explained general relativity. I don't believe in it. But then if the guy actually believes in an irrational theory, you don't have to say it. It's just implied that he is also irrational. And that's where the big fist fights come in.
But my point is kind of like you're doing it backwards because
Okay.
you're taking the word irrational and you're trying to define it. But really...
Right. Because nobody has.
But hold on, but that's kind of backwards in a sense.
Okay.
Because the word is irrelevant. It doesn't matter what word we're defining. We're just
we can use it.
We're just trying. Yeah. But it's irrelevant because we're just trying to show that the theories that we do call irrational or A or dog have these four conditions. We're just trying to shine a light on these four conditions. The word is just the shorthand. From then on, once we understand what we mean by the word, then it's just shorthand from then on. But what's really important here are the conditions, the rules for losing a debate or not making sense, or what's the best way to say? Without using the word irrational. No, but as
listen to something. There was what's his name, Leonard Susskind, and he said, look, we had to reinvent, I don't know the exact word, but he said we have to reinvent what common sense is. So he used the term common sense. You can say rational or irrational, you can say common sense. We're all referring to the same thing. Now I can use the word dog or the letter A, and nobody will have any idea what I'm talking about. But when I say rational, people say, oh, you're redefining or you're defining rational. Yes, I am. I'm saying you got to get used to what we were going to think about when we talk about a rational or irrational theory.
But
that's where people start trembling because they're saying, oh, you're saying that my theory is irrational. And now you get a fight. But if you say, look, I'm going to define dog. And people say, well, dog to me is something else. And we can go that with any word in the dictionary. You can say, I'll call it table.
You can make up a word. Schlorp.
Right. And this
is schlorp.
Yeah, but then people will say, well, what is that? Okay, and you can
this
put the
is my
criteria
point.
and they'll still won't understand.
But
you got to use the word rational or common sense.
But this is my point to that. If they say, well, that you're just redefining irrational to fit your needs, well, that's besides the point because all we're asking is, does your theory fit these conditions? Forget the word.
Right, and so there's no problem in using the word rational for that matter as well.
No, I'm just saying the word is it doesn't matter. Just basically what we're saying is, does your theory or does it not fit these conditions?
Okay.
Forget the word.
Okay, we can call it A.
That's the most important part. The word rational or irrational is like the cherry on the cake.
It's just a qualifier. It's just to put it all under one heading. Any way you want to look at it. I like the word rational because it offends in a way. And sometimes you need to offend to create that shock to get people out of their hypnotism.
It's really just the word that fits. That's
just
the word that
right.
You would
I can
that.
say this is commonsensical science or commonsensical physics, And, you know, again, you have people like Susskind say we had to reinvent what common sense is. He's doing the same thing. He's saying, look, you know, what we're doing here in mathematics, we're looking at quantum world, we can't see it, so we created all these concepts that we move around. We had to reinvent what commonsensical means. And I'm saying no. You don't go into irrationality, into uncommonsensical. In fact, he uses that term. He says we had to invent uncommon sense. So it's like he's saying, look, we are irrational. We are uncommonsensical. He pointed his fingers at the mathematician saying we are uncommonsensical. And I'm glad he admitted that, because it just shows that, yeah, they've gone outside of physics. In fact, Born said it in the 1920s, 1927 or so on. He said, Max Born, and he said, you know, physics has become more abstract. And if you look up the word abstract, it's the opposite of physical. So they become less physical, physics, and more abstract. They should call it, you know, the Department of Abstractions in Harvard or Cambridge, because that's what they do. They do they move abstractions. They don't move physical things anymore. And so the question is, yeah, that's uncommonsensical, because I cannot imagine you moving an abstraction, a concept. That's where the problem comes in. And so they're not giving you a physical interpretation for the real world. They're talking about their abstractions, which they created at the, you know, in their blackboards, some concept that they created. And they say, I'm going to be moving, you know, this spirit, this energy, this mass, this field. You know, that's where the problem is. And so we have to define what rationality or common sense is, and yeah, people are going to fight against that. If it destroys their upbringing or what they've been doing in the last 100 years, there's going to be resistance to that change, because it goes to the foundations of what these people are talking about. Anyways, you know, so what are some of the foundations of physics? What are we talking? If physics is a branch of science, and I think nobody will challenge that. If physics is a branch of science, what are the foundations of physics? What do we need to do physics? And so I created a series of foundations. They have to do a little bit with what the mathematicians are going to reject as semantics. But we need to establish what the foundations of physics are. And this has nothing to do with ontology. It's got nothing to do with semantics. It's got nothing to do with my opinions. It's got to do with, you can't do physics without an object. What are you going to be moving? If there are no objects in the universe, what are you going to be moving? What event is happening? So it goes to the root of what physics is about. You need objects. That's the first word that you know, that sine qua non word of physics. You absolutely need an object, and that's not an opinion. It's just that you can't do physics without it. And you know, I'm sure that very few people will be able to justify the opposite, that you can do physics without objects. That's the first one. So what I'm saying is, you need to define what an object is, and here it is, that which has shape. And then you can go through the list, and you need to know what distance is, location, what a concept is to distinguish it from an object, motion, and exist. I'm saying these words are sine qua non. You absolutely need to define these words. These are the foundations of physics. Okay? And again, if you reject these words, any of these words, then you need to be able to justify, you know, where you got, why you disagree with them, and put something in exchange, because we got to do physics. You got to create the foundations of physics, and you know, that's where you got to put something in its place. You can't just leave and say, oh, I destroyed your proposal, so I'm leaving. No, we got to shut physics down otherwise. Okay? So what is an object? An object is that which has shape. And here, people will criticize that, because they say, that's also your subjective opinion. And here we can see other proposals that are out there, that which we can see, that which
real
we...
quick, so that all this makes sense. We kind of need to know, or have a consensus, you and whoever you're talking to, this figment of quantum mechanics that we keep evoking. We would have to at least have consensus on what the purpose of physics or science is before any of this would make sense. But for now, let's just take what do you say is the purpose of physics or science, so that all this can make sense?
Well, the purpose of physics is to explain phenomena in the real world. And for that, that means we have to define what we mean by real. And again, real is a synonym of exist, and that's why that word is in there, because physics is the science of existence. Physics only studies, or better still, explains things that exist or phenomena that occur in real life. You know, physics doesn't deal with Superman and Alice in Wonderland falling into her rabbit hole. Physics doesn't deal with that. Physics deals with real phenomena. And so for that, you need to define what real is. Yeah. In this case, we mean the word exist, and that's why that word was on that list.
Well, more importantly, the crux of what you said was the word explain, because if you're going to explain something, forget about to yourself. For now, to make it clearer, when you want to explain something to someone else, they have to understand what words you're using. What are the words shorthand for? Basically, what are these? Because every word is like a byte of information, and if they're getting the wrong information, they're not going to understand, or they're going to understand something completely wrong. So all this that you're saying with definitions, for sure, is important if you want to explain something crisp, precisely.
And that's why, you know, what I've done is I defined the word explain. What is an explanation? By the way, we don't rehearse these things. We improvise here. So I want you to know that.
I think that's obvious.
You know, my son and I, it's not like we rehearse this and then we bring it on. He just asked a question. I was ready because I knew the discussion was going to go along that line. And so, you know, I do have these props ready. So what is explain? This is my definition of explain.
It would be embarrassing. It would be more embarrassing if this were rehearsed.
I'm saying the causes in the case of physics, the reasons in the case of philosophy, and I'm saying that science is divided into physics and philosophy. One deals with causes, the other one with reasons, and one deals with mechanisms, the other one with purposes. One deals with objects, and the other one with concepts. That's in general terms, okay? But here we say, what is explain? We say the causes or reasons underlying a phenomenon, okay? We need to know, or we're trying to figure out what caused, in the case of physics, that's what we're interested here mainly, what caused something to happen? What was the mechanism that underlies it? And the second version of that, of explain, is the prosecutor's version of how or why a consummated event happened. And again, we're referring to mechanism. When we're saying how, we're not saying that I'm just going to say, oh, the magician cut the lady in half and he did it in 20 strokes and he used 15 seconds to do it. We don't care about that's a description. We want to know how the trick is done. That's the difference. And that's when we say how or why, we're referring to how the magician did the trick and not what actually just objectively happened on stage. Okay, so explain has to do with the mechanism behind it. And a synonym is to theorize. What do we mean by understand? And again, this is not rehearsed. I want you to know. Here's understand. That's my version of understand. To process a series of images mentally. To watch a movie in the mind. In other words, your mind is, you're watching a movie, you're regurgitating some kind of movie. You're running the video inside your brain and you're trying to make sense of it. That's what understand means. Second version of that, to rationalize or make sense of a concept. And the third one is to faithfully reproduce or absorb the prosecutor's theory in one's own mind, to acknowledge communication. Okay, so if you did not understand, you have not yet acknowledged, you know, the explanation, what the prosecutor was trying to get to you, and that's the issue that we've got here, you know, in these definitions. Let me get this thing out. There we go. So I try to provide definitions for these words because they do come up in discussions, in debates. People say, what did you mean by explain? I thought I explained. No, you did not explain how a magnet attracts another. You just said positive attracts negative, and that's not an explanation. That's a description. And you can understand the description, but the issue in physics is to understand the explanation, the cause, the mechanism. And that's why we have to get into these definitions. What do you mean by explain? What do you mean by understand? And sometimes the words of ordinary speech or the definitions of ordinary speech that you find in the dictionary are insufficient to deal with these matters. You really have to redefine this a little more carefully, because otherwise people go, off on tangents and say, well, I thought I understood, or I did understand, and you're saying, well, what did you understand? If I say I moved a wave function, you say, well, I understood. What do you mean you understood? You moved a concept and you understood? No, make a movie of it, and then you can show me that you did understand. Regurgitate what the mechanic, or the relativistic guy said. Regurgitate it, but not verbally. Make a movie of it. Show me what you did understand. Reproduce it.
It's crazy that we don't have precise definitions, or precision with definitions is never harped on in really any what do you call it? Practice?
Discipline,
exactly.
Any discipline, yeah.
There's no discipline that comes to mind, like, that just jumps out at me, that really harps on the definitions of things. Maybe linguists would disagree. I don't know if how much, but I don't know if they're more interested in etymology, like where words come from. Or,
by the way, we have a question there by Martin. Keep that in mind.
Have you defined the foundations of philosophy? Or do you want to finish with the foundations of physics?
Martin, all I can tell you is I'm not into philosophy, and Monkey has created, I think, a group called Irrational Philosophy. I'm not in that group. I told them I don't want to be in that group because I don't deal with philosophy. What do I mean by that? I mean that, I'm not interested in analyzing things like love, consciousness, information, intelligence. I'm not interested in those subjects personally. And one of the reasons maybe that I'm not interested in them is that it's very opinionated maybe, and it's a lot more complicated or complex than physics. Physics is objects, it's more objective. But when you talk about the mind and what should be, and love is this and that, and we have this theory of love and you have another theory of love, I think it can get quite much more complicated than physics. And that's just my idea in general, but in more specific, I'm not interested in those subjects. So I haven't defined the foundation of philosophy, but I guess that's what that group is for. You can go ahead and define it, and I bless all of you. I'm into my own world of physics, and I'm sufficiently happy with that. I've got my hands full with that, believe me. So go ahead and define and do what you have to in the world of philosophy, and then come back, and I'll be glad to tear whatever you did apart, to challenge it or whatever. But right now I'm not so interested in that subject, and that's why no. The answer is no. I have not defined the words, the foundations of philosophy. I guess you still need to define what you mean by explain and understand. I think those two words need to be in there. You need to define what a concept is, right? Because philosophy is going to deal with concepts. You have to define what you mean by reason and purpose, because that's essentially that realm. That's what the discipline does there. And so those are the words that you would need to define. I have not defined them. Okay, I have not defined, as far as I know. I don't know. Maybe I'll have to look at the glossary in my book.
I tried defining morality, and I still haven't finished it.
Yeah, morality is another subject. What is moral? And you got a million people out there with different notions of what morality is.
Well, because in a nutshell, real quick, I don't want to go too deep in it, but when you start trying to come up with every possible scenario, and you basically play kind of a game of whack-a-mole where you say, okay, what about this scenario?
Whack,
well, that's
the other
moral.
one comes up.
Yeah, where you go, okay, what about this? Your brain just throws you a scenario. What about this one? Well, that one's moral. You just kind of go with your gut feeling. Oh, why is it moral? Then you throw up another one. Okay, that one's immoral. Why is that one immoral? And then you just kind of keep going through all the scenarios you can think of.
And you have all these explanations of
just to get to the definition. Why do I call this moral and that immoral?
Right. Is killing your neighbor immoral?
Real quick.
Well, if he killed my brother, maybe it is moral. Maybe I'm justified. I have a reason to kill him, vengeance or whatever. So if you just take it in the absolute, is it killing my neighbor moral? And I'm saying, well, what are the conditions? If he killed my brother, and he assassinated him. You know, maybe I don't like that, and that's why I took vengeance. So under those conditions, maybe it is moral.
But,
you know, and
but
again,
this brings up an interesting point that we haven't raised, which is, how do I know? How do I even say this? How do you? Let's say you're trying to define a word, right?
Okay.
It's like you know the definition. You're just trying to put it into words.
Of ordinary speech.
No, but
Clarify
not ordinary
that.
speech. It's a gut thing. Just like I said, when I say, okay, why do I call this car, or why do I call this irrational and that rational? For example.
Yeah.
It's like It's like you're asking. It's like you're asking yourself. It's like you
Yeah.
already know. Your gut already knows. Like if someone says, something, you'll call that irrational, even if you don't have a definition yet. Someone will call this, I don't know, flying, even though he doesn't have the specific word.
The guy's swimming, it's a
like
fish, and he calls it flying.
We have the words kind of like in our soul or whatever, in our subconscious. Intuitively. We just don't have it specifically. So when you're trying to define a word, it's weird. It's like you're asking yourself, okay, what are all the things that I would call this? And then you just try to find the criteria the least amount of criteria that fit all those things that you would call this.
Smart kid, isn't he? And yeah, I defined the word definition, and that's important too. You need to define what a definition is, and I'm saying it's the I don't remember the exact wording right now, but it's like you have it's what was it? You reject. What was it? I'm trying to remember now what I said. You put all kinds of conditions, okay, so that you reject any possibility of confusing that word with something else. And I give the example, which is a wrong example because it refers to objects, but you'll get the gist of it just by looking at this. I say it's white, it has wings, right? And you say, well, are you referring to a swan or the White House? Because the White House has wings too. And so in order to reject the bird, you say it's a building. And so now you restricted the definition further and further and further until there's no confusion when you say white with wings, etc., etc. And again, that refers to object, but I guess it puts it in the right context. If you say, what is an object? And the guy said, well, it's that which has shape, or that which moves, or that which I can see or touch. And you say, well, can you see and touch space-time? And the guy said, well, no, I can't. So is that an object?
That's when the intuitive defining doesn't suffice.
Right, and then you got to go deeper and deeper and deeper so that you exclude, and you arrive at the word shape, and that exclude, that's universal. All objects have shape, and it rejects all other possibilities. You can't confuse it with that which you can see or touch.
The thing about this intuitive defining is that I think that's why people get into all these
discussions, debates,
and just knots. Everyone gets into knots because when let's say we have two people, A and B, and they're trying to they're trying to talk about the word life. That's one of my favorite ones because that's one of the hard. That one's up there with morality.
Okay.
So you got the word life, right? And they're both having a biological discussion on something, and this guy's intuition has life in this box. This guy's intuition has life in that box.
And we have
it's like a Venn diagram where a lot of things overlap, but some things this guy is missing, and this guy's missing the other guy. So it's like that's when they go into knots because like, no, you're using the word wrong, or they go into this like just not.
Or they don't understand each other because this guy's emphasizing some parts that the other of that Venn diagram, they do coincide on some parts, but there are parts they don't coincide in. So this guy is saying, oh no, but I mean with this word, the word A, I mean this, and the guy says, oh no, you don't. I mean that.
That's definitely not what this means.
Right. So they have different notions of what it is, and that's where you have to kind of get to the Venn part, the part that intersects. You got to get into the intersection because and exclude all the others because the others are only confusing the issue.
No, but that's not right. Real because that's
agreement. That's agreement.
Yeah, that's agreement.
Yeah,
but the way that you do it is it kind of cuts through all that because like, oh, we're just gonna take one of these circles. We're just gonna take one of these circles and that guy's gonna hold a speech. just so we can understand them, we're gonna assume anytime you use this word, it's everything that falls in this circle. That way, there's no confusion.
Absolutely good. Yeah, and again, what I'm saying, you got to fight. You got to fight for these definitions. The guy has to come. One guy comes in and says, "This is my definition." The other guy says, "This is my definition." And each one, because they have different religions, different beliefs, different definitions, they have to fight. And this guy's got to point out what's wrong with this guy's definitions, and vice versa.
But do they?
Well, they do
because right now we have two different ones. Now we have the circle and we have the Venn diagram. What you're talking about right now is the Venn diagram, where they're both trying to come to a consensus on the word.
No, not consensus.
But
not really
it?
consensus. No,
like the Venn part.
And and this is what I pointed out that you've got, at least from my point of view, you got wrong from the other day. We don't reach agreements. We do not sign a contract. We do not vote in science. In science, you say, look, this is rationality. These are my conditions. These are my criteria. The other guy says, I don't like them. I don't like them. I reject them. Okay,
then
fine.
You can leave the conference. Are we done?
Well, yes. Let me go in a little more detail.
Hey, get out of here. Let me. You don't want to listen.
More or less. So more or less. I'm along those lines. Let's listen carefully here. You have a Christian and you have a Muslim. Do they agree? Do they vote? And they say, okay, let's put it to a vote. Let's see who's right. No, that's not what they do. These guys continue doing Christianity. These guys continue doing, Islam. They do not reach an agreement. They do not reach a consensus. Each one has his own religion. And so if you're going to go into the Muslim world and you're a Christian, you're going to argue with a Muslim, he's going to say, these are the rules over here. And you say, well, I don't like your rules. Okay, then challenge them. So you challenge the rules or whatever, and you try to show that the other guy is irrational or that he's got them wrong or whatever. And vice versa. If the Muslim wants to go into Christianity, he's got to abide by their rules and so on. And it's more or less like that. And I'm saying someone comes into rational science. Do we say, well, we're going to try to accommodate you as long as you put your money in the box, we're going to be happy with you. Don't leave our room. We want you here. No, that's not the way it works in science. The way it works in science, put on your gloves, put up your dukes, we're going to fight. And the guy says, I don't like your criteria. Okay, you don't like my criteria, what do you propose in its stead?
Yeah, but hold on. But to that, the context is extremely important, because if we're just doing a presentation, right, then the guy can shut up. It's just that simple. I'm about to do a presentation. I'm going to use the word dog, and this is what I call dog.
Okay.
It doesn't matter what his opinion of the word dog is. It's how I'm using it so that he can understand it.
Fine.
It's literally irrelevant if he agrees with the definition.
But we're talking about not a word.
That's what I'm saying. The context is important, because defining words for a presentation, everyone shuts up. We're just going to take my circle, everyone can shut up. It's that simple.
Love it.
But then in a debate, it gets weirder, because now if we're going to use the same words and it's a back and forth, now we do need some sort of consensus so that we can both use the words so that we can both understand each other. Again, if I'm using
no, we don't need to consensus. You just need to know what my definition is.
Well, yeah, but then it gets kind of confusing using the same word with different definitions.
Yeah, but
if I use the word life for A and use the word life for B, we might as well be using two different words at that point.
Yeah, and again, the only way we can resolve that is there's a fight, and the fight doesn't really mean there is a consensus. Quite the contrary. There's no consensus between the champ and the challenger or the contender. There's no consensus. One guy wins, okay, objectively on the stage, in the ring. Now, what do we mean by that in science? We're saying someone comes over and he's got his version of science, his version of how this universe works, and you have your version. You have the rational science version, right? And you say, okay, these are my rules. The guy comes in, he wants to fight, he says, you guys are crazy, you guys are, out of your minds, okay. You're small, nobody believes in you, irrelevant, we don't care about that. These are our rules. Challenge the rules first. The guy, before he starts boxing, he's going to say, do I actually believe in, do I have an argument against these criteria? And if he can't challenge that, and you ask him, okay, what are yours? And he says, these are my criteria for rationality, for example. So now we have a clash of understanding or notions of what we mean by rational. This guy has his, this guy has black, this guy has white, essentially, right? So there's a clash, there's a fight there. And so now each side has to criticize the other side. You say, look, this is what's wrong with your side, or what's irrational, or whatever about your side. This is why it won't fly. And the other guy has to do the same with yours. And you know, and again, when you have objective criteria, like you can't use a concept as an object, and I don't know what anyone can come up with against that. It doesn't even come to my mind that someone could challenge that criteria.
If anything, it sounds superfluous. Like, oh, do we really have to mention that?
Right, right. It's like it's a self evident, right? And so I have a problem with someone trying to reject that for a theory. Again, we're not referring to the person. We're saying a theory that uses a concept as an object is irrational. And I'm not sure how anyone can criticize that. And the guy can say, look, I have another criteria. Okay, fine, let's discuss that one. And if you can't find anything wrong with it, we'll include it. But that doesn't mean we've got to reject the other one. The other one is a valid criteria as far as I'm concerned. And so if you're going to say, look, if we're going to fight about science, these are my arguments. That's what I'm going to take to the war, to the battlefield, okay? And the other guy says, okay, I'm going to bring my army. Fine, let's fight. And if the guy can't figure out a way to destroy your criterion, that criterion stays, and vice versa. If you can destroy the other guy's criterion, and the guy just leaves the battlefield and says, well, you know, I don't agree with you, and I'm not going to follow your rules, well, he lost, because he left the battlefield, because he can't answer your criticism of his position. Okay, that's what I'm saying. And that's all we can do. So it doesn't mean that the Christian's going to become a Muslim or vice versa. It means this guy's going to be a Muslim, this guy's going to be a Christian. And we're going to be rational scientists, and the mathematicians can do all the weird stuff they do. You know, we're not going to have a consensus where we say, okay, let's take it to a vote. No way. This is not a voting issue. This is a question of let's fight, and let's see what your arguments are, and let's see if they're rational. And I'm going to point out what your shortcomings are, and you got to point out what the shortcomings are of what I'm proposing. And if you have no valid arguments, I'm the champ. Objectively the champ. And that's the way I look at it, at least. But no, to answer Martin's, you know, I don't have...
you already answered that one.
Yeah, well, just to cover that base again, I have no foundations for philosophy. I'm just saying that you need to define perhaps reason, purpose, concept, and explanation and understanding. I think those 5 words should form some kind of foundation. Maybe you have some more words, fine. But I think those 5 are like required. Okay.
I wanted to talk about notions.
Oh, notions.
Notions.
But notion is a very weird word. It's a very abstract word.
Yeah, but it's one we haven't talked on, and I think it's very important.
Okay, why do you think it's important, first of all? Notions. Notion is a concept.
Hold on.
It's a synonym of concept.
Notion, the way I'm using the word at least, so we're on the same page.
Okay.
Is the definition of a word before you define it, something like that.
Okay, so it's a
like
intuitive.
It's like the precursor to a definition.
Okay, it's like the brainstorming session,
something
maybe?
like that, where we have a notion. Let's not say definition. We have a notion for love, right?
Okay.
We all kind of are in the ballpark, somewhat.
Okay, love is what the lion does with the lioness. That's love.
What do you have you ever thought of notions? Because essentially, when we're trying to define a word, I mean, not the presentation kind, because the presentation kind of cuts through everything. It's very objective.
You're talking about debate.
Sense. Yeah, in the debate sense, because that's what a debate is about. They have conflicting notions.
Don't you have to first give a presentation before you get into a debate?
Yeah, but in the presentation again, they're both gonna have 2 different circles.
Fine.
That's where.
But now we have a contrast.
That's where the obviously. But essentially we're just skipping ahead to the debate part.
Okay.
In the debate, this guy has his definition or notion of God. Let's just take God for example.
Okay.
And the other guy's got his notion of God. Everyone's got their own notion of God. Like we have an 8 billion circle Venn diagram on this notion of God. And we're all kind of trying to cover as many of everyone else's Yeah, we're trying to cover as much.
To accommodate?
It's not it's to understand each other.
Well, is it to understand? I mean,
it's to understand.
If you make it so wide, I'm saying the definition is what is restricted, not what is wide. If you make it wide, it's like, well, I don't want to offend you, so let's incorporate your notion as well.
That's not what I'm talking about.
Then what?
With the 8 billion circle diagram, it's more like, let's start with what we all mean by this word.
Brainstorm.
Isn't that a good place to start? Isn't
okay.
that kind of what we're all trying to do when we're discussing these things? When these guys are talking about God and this guy's talking about God,
it. But it's a brainstorming.
It's like that's at least where to start. What do we all mean by the word love? What do we all mean by, or even better, what do we all not mean? That one's even easier.
Well, I
what
think
do we all not mean?
Not mean is a longer list.
Yeah, it's a longer list, but I
don't like that one.
But it's an easier place to start, man. That's the easiest place.
No,
to
but
start.
I think you said it right. We put the word notion, and we're going to brainstorm now. Well, what do you understand by? We look at the definition, the dictionary. We list it. Maybe there's a couple dictionaries out there. They have different definitions. Let's list them all.
Even internationally.
Right, yeah, including internationally. And then if you know the language, or you translate using the Google Translator, now the other person says, I don't agree with any of those, or or he adds something to it. He says, I have this other notion of the word notion. Oh, okay, what is it? And we put it on, so we list them. And now we find faults with different ones because people say, well, if you use it this way, we're going to run into this trouble. The other guy says something similar. And so we start cutting down our list. It's no longer such a long list. The brainstorming becomes shorter and shorter, because now there's debate. So the debate makes the brainstorming shorter.
But it's weird. But the shortening of the list is the weird part because the shorter you make the list, the less people agree.
But you don't have to agree.
Yeah,
you have to fight.
But it's not fight. See, that's why I don't like the fight part.
You don't like the fight
because it doesn't make sense in this case. It's not a fight.
Okay.
Because you're not looking for a fight. You're just trying to figure out, okay, what does he mean by the word? We're not going to see eye to eye on this. But I'm not going to convince the other guy of anything.
And it's not about convincing. It's about using
argument.
You use arguments of why you can't use that word consistently, rationally, scientifically.
Okay, I'm not talking about.
If you have such a wide range,
okay,
you kind of have
to
shorten that list.
I'm not talking about the consistently. Oh yeah, I am talking about the consistency.
Because if the guy can't use it consistently and you show that, then you got to scratch that one in from the board, I would think.
But what I'm trying to say is, in a debate, or even when just two people are talking, they both have their notions of a word, and those notions aren't going to change. We're only defining the words so that we can both use the same word with the same definition so that we don't get into a knot.
No,
isn't that what we're trying to do?
No, I don't think that's what we're trying to. At least that's not the way I look at it. I'm saying objectively, can you use it consistently? And the other person says, look, let me point out why, or an example of why you can't use that word consistently under these conditions. If you can show that, then the guy has to, say, okay, give me a reason why I should use it the way you defined it. If here I'm showing you an example where it's used inconsistently, and then that's where you run into trouble. And then your job, the guy who defends that definition, the onus is on him. The ball is now in his court to come up with an answer to that question or to show why he can use it consistently.
You know what you really need, Pops? You need a couple of...
Shamus guy.
Yeah, he said,
totally in agreement. It's the study of concepts, reasons, and purpose.
He said philosophy is the study of concepts.
Yeah. And remember, it's also got to do with reasons and purpose, the way I look at it. Why? Because I think under philosophy, you have to do some kind of explaining. So it's not just a study. Remember, if philosophy is under science, right? And you don't have to agree with it, but I'm saying we're going to put philosophy under science. You got to do some kind of rational explanation.
The explanation of concepts.
Right. And what are you going to explain? Well, you can explain concepts. You can go into explain love, consciousness. What was the one you mentioned earlier? Life. You can get into a lot of those concepts. That's one branch. The other branch is you have to explain purposes and reasons. You know, I use the example of Napoleon. Why did he go to Waterloo? Why did Caesar go to England? You know, there's different opinions or different rationalizations for that. And that's what you're also explaining. I think that's part of philosophy. It's your philosophy that this is your explanation for the purpose or reason. That's what I'm saying. That's how it fits in there.
Well, as I was saying before that, what I was saying is I think you need to make debate tutorials. I think that's what's missing. That's what's missing on the channel.
Oh, okay.
We need at least one
I
tutorial.
have the brightest son in the world. I have to listen to what he says because
it's basically where you go
tutorial.
Where you have two theoretical people, Joey and Bobby.
Okay.
And you give an example of a debate, and you always and you kind of do a mock debate. And at every point you say, okay, and this is where Johnny fucked up, or this is where Bobby messed up because he didn't use the word consistently, or just kind of like a.
You know what he just regurgitated? He regurgitated Galileo. What did Galileo write? He wrote Dialogue of Two Worlds, right? And he put essentially, the dumb guy. What was his name? I had it in the tip of my tongue. But anyways, the dumb guy represents the Catholic Church. And the smart guy, he represents the new wave of people like Kepler and Galileo and so on, who say, and Copernicus and so on. They say, look, you guys in the Catholic Church, you're defending the wrong thing just because you're going by Scripture, and our telescopes are telling us something different. We see not only there's more than 7 planets, which are not mentioned in the Bible, because now we found 4 moons, at that time, the Galilean moons. We found 4 moons going around Jupiter. But, here we can show that all these planets, including the Earth, go around the sun. And the Catholic Church just went out of their minds because of this. But that's a dialogue. It's a dialogue between a rational person and an irrational one. Simplicium, that was his name. Simplicium or something about simplicity, Simplicium.
Yeah, my point is it doesn't have to be so cartoonish. It's more just to show people where debates go wrong. You don't even have to make up one. You can take any debate off YouTube that goes off the rails, and you can literally point out, look, this is where it could have not gone off the rails because they didn't use the same word consistently right here at this point.
For the first time, I'm going to listen to my son because I think he said something very important. You got to have a tutorial for debates.
Really
like the rules for debating. What is a rational debate? And for people to know at what point the thing got derailed.
Yeah, and why debates go in circles without
There's several questions there.
And why debates go in circles without anyone
several issues. We have Martin Yarholt. He says, not a question. Speaking of opinion and philosophy, I've now pledged per month exactly the amount that Sweden taxes you if you happen to own electronics that can receive TV signals. Torsion of ropes. Yeah, that's the energy that you're getting. See, you're paying for energy. I love that one. Shamu, how to make sense. Really, rationality is nothing but the minimum requirements for actual sense making. Yeah, and again, we're kind of going in circles. Remember, you're saying sense making, and that's rationale, and it's like you're saying, well, rationality is sense making. Yeah, but that's like a synonym. We kind of have to define it a little more precisely.
No, not define. We need
criteria. And that's what I'm trying to do. I've tried to put criteria at least from a rational point of view. And someone's got to come up and say, look, you're irrational because of this or that, or this is why your criterion is not valid. They have to point that out to you. And meanwhile, you can use that same criterion to overthrow whatever they propose, because for sure, if a mathematician confronts you and you say, look, let me show you why your stuff is irrational, because you're using concepts as objects. First one, right? And the guy, what's the guy going to say? No? I mean, what's he going to say? Oh, well, we spend the day moving concepts at the lab. I mean, come on. So it's like he said at the beginning, it's self-evident. It's a self-evident criterion, and it's very hard
for the notion of rationality.
Right, and it's going to be very hard to debunk that one. And people, I want you to know something. I have written already 2 or 3 articles in which I've included that in Quora, and no one has come back saying you're wrong because of this. They attack me personally, fine, that's great, but they have not attacked the criterion because they cannot. What are they going to put for you're irrational in using that criterion? What are they going to say? No, they're going to say you destroyed my religion and I don't like it. That's all they can say.
I mean, the using concepts as objects rule or condition really you'd think is at the center of the 8 billion circle Venn diagram of the word rationality.
8 billion, okay.
Well, I mean, if we're talking about the 8 billion diagram of the word, of the notion of rationality or irrationality, you'd think that using concepts as objects is at least in 7 billion of those. It's very close to the center.
I agree. Everybody's got his own religion, and that's why we have to establish some rules, because we're having more people on the planet, and all we're creating is more Venn diagrams here. We're creating more definitions, more philosophies, more notions of notions.
But to what they said about least amount, because they use the comments here, the rationality is nothing but the minimum requirements for actual sense making. I like the minimum requirements part because that also goes to definitions.
Yeah.
Where you're not trying to
restrict.
Yeah. Where you're not only restrict, but you're trying to put the least amount of conditions.
Okay. Good.
That separates it from every other word.
Perfect.
You're not trying to put like a billion conditions doing this
right,
patchwork
and this,
thing.
and if that, and if the other. No, it's just chop it off. Make sure the word is crisp. That the definition is crisp and understandable, and that you don't have to agree to it. But if you don't agree with it, then you have to come up with an alternative. And the first guy has to challenge you and say, well, can you use that consistently? That's like an objective way of testing the definition. Say, can you use it objectively? And you can show that he does, and the other guy can show that you don't. Well, then you got to fight. Then you got something to challenge, something you can sink your teeth into. But if the guy just says, "Well, I believe that this is my definition," he's just giving you his opinion. He's doing religion. He's not doing science.
And a great practice for definition, just as the cherry on top of all this, would be if you had a debate with a computer, with a program that literally takes your definitions.
Okay, let's put it in the computer. Let's see if you fight against the computer. Don't fight against me. Fight against the computer.
It's a nice what do you call it? Like a brain teaser, like a thought experiment.
No, I'll give you an example.
It's a thought experiment to think. Anyone who's programmed anything to who knows how literally computers take definitions.
Let me give you an example of what he just said. The mathematician programs the computer, okay? Here's the mathematician. He says, particle. So you got to define it so the computer understands what particle means. He says wave function or a probability wave. And now he goes into a sentence. He says, and we accelerated a particle on the beamline and crashed it inside the chamber. And so the computer says, does not compute. He lost. The computer says, it does not compute. We got a problem there. I can't crash what is a concept. I can't accelerate what is a concept. So please redefine, or you will be exterminated in 2 seconds. Then the guy puts his life on the line. Then I would love to see that. If they're going to say, well, all our mathematicians at the math club, we voted for it. The computer doesn't care. The computer's going to be objective and say, we don't care how many people, how many idiots voted for it.
Objective is logical.
Right.
The computer's being I think logic is a nice word because
I got to put that in the computer.
Because logic takes just that first the first one of the list that you put.
The last man to comment is rational. Oh no, then if you say that, then we're going to have comments till the end of time. Everybody's going to try to be the last guy.
How was I saying?
I don't know.
I forgot what I was saying. But
well, it's time's up anyways. We got to continue this tomorrow. But I think we have to define what we mean by rationality. And it's not a question of agreeing and reaching consensus. It's a question of someone comes into your store and he wants to challenge and say that you are irrational, you are a silly person for the beliefs you hold. And what you do is apply the definitions or the criterion for rationality. You say, look, this is where I get my rationality. This is what I understand by rationality. And you apply them, you know, very objectively, very very scientifically, very consistently. And you challenge the other guy to say, well, what's wrong with what I just said? And the other guy, if he's going to come at you, he can't come with, again, ad hominems. He's got to come in and say, look, this is where your theory or your explanation or your proposal fails. And he's got to point that out. And obviously he's got to bring his own stuff because, you know, we got to have a solution for physics. We can't just say, oh, I destroyed your religion and I'm going home. No, you got to show me what you're proposing instead. I'm the champ, Dan says. No, you're not, because you're not the last one. Martin has the last comment, so I got to say that he's the most rational guy, right?
Oh, now it's a gradient.
We'll see you tomorrow, folks, and same time, same station. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.